The moving truck rumbled to a stop at the end of Maple Crest Drive, just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. The neighborhood was calm. White fences, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes, and the sound of sprinklers ticking in the distance. To anyone else, it looked like a picture of quiet suburbia. Marcus Reed stepped out of his car, stretching his back after a long day. He wore jeans and a gray sweatshirt, the kind of clothes that didn't draw attention. His new house, a modest two-story with blue shutters and a porch swing, sat waiting for him at the end of the street. He stood there for a moment, just looking at it. He had saved for years to buy this place. It wasn't big, but it was his. No more apartments, no more bureau housing, no more temporary addresses on government forms. Just a home. He smiled faintly and started unloading boxes from the car. Across the street, a curtain shifted. A neighbor, older man, maybe late 60s, peered out, watching him for a few seconds before disappearing back inside. Marcus didn't notice. He was too busy setting boxes on the porch and unlocking the door. The scent of new paint and wood polish filled the air. He'd hired a small crew to handle most of the move earlier that morning. But there were always a few things he wanted to bring himself: his mother's piano books, a framed flag from Quantico, and a photo of his late father in uniform. As he carried another box inside, headlights swept across the front yard. A black and white patrol car slowed to a stop in front of the house. Marcus frowned, wiping his hands on his sweatshirt. Two uniformed officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting across the driveway. "Evening, sir," one called. "Can we help you with something?" Marcus blinked. "Help me?" The taller officer approached, hand resting casually on his belt. "We got a call about a possible trespassing in progress. You live here?" Marcus nodded, confused. "Yes, just moved in today. Do you have ID on you?" "Of course," Marcus said. He set down the box and reached for his wallet. The second officer stepped closer. "Can I ask your name, sir?" "Marcus Reed. Where are you moving from?" "DC," Marcus said evenly. "Look, is there a problem?" The taller one glanced toward the house, shining his light through the window. "You have paperwork showing this is your property." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "I have the deed inside. Closing was 3 days ago. Mind if we take a look?" "Yes, I do mind," Marcus said calmly. "So you can wait here while I grab it." He walked inside, keeping his voice level, his movements steady. He'd dealt with tense situations before, much worse than this, but something about being questioned in front of his own home felt different. When he returned with the folder, both officers were standing a little closer to the porch than before. "Here," Marcus said, handing over the deed and driver's license. "Everything matches." The younger officer took them, glancing between the address and Marcus's face. "You said Marcus Reed." "That's right," the older one nodded slowly. "Okay, just doing our due diligence, sir. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." "Suspicious how?" Marcus asked. New faces mostly. You understand? He did understand. More than they knew. The younger officer handed back the papers. "You'll need to keep your porch lights on, sir. Neighbors tend to get nervous when they don't recognize someone." Marcus forced a polite smile. "I'll keep that in mind." They nodded, gave a brief "have a good night," and walked back to their car. He stood there for a long moment, watching as the patrol car turned the corner and disappeared. Then he looked down the street. Curtains moved again, someone else peeking out. He exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest growing heavier. Inside, the house was quiet. He leaned against the door and closed his eyes for a second. He'd spent his entire adult life serving the country, protecting neighborhoods just like this one, and yet here he was, and a stranger on his own front porch. He walked to the kitchen, opened a box and pulled out his worn leather wallet. Inside, next to his driver's license, was his federal badge. He stared at it for a moment, the small emblem of authority that meant nothing outside of context. "Welcome home," he murmured to himself. The next morning, he woke early and went for a run through the neighborhood. The air was crisp, quiet except for the soft sound of his sneakers against the pavement. As he passed the same houses, he noticed people watching him again. A woman watering her flowers, a man walking his dog. Some nodded politely, others didn't. When he returned home, a small white envelope sat tucked in his mailbox. No stamp, no name, just the word "notice" written in black pen. He opened it. Inside was a single printed sheet. Neighborhood watch reminder. Please report all suspicious individuals and unusual vehicles immediately. He stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of irony settle deep in his chest. He wasn't angry, just tired. That afternoon he parked his car in the driveway, opened the garage and began setting up his home office. The files, the books, the certificates, reminders of a career spent doing something that mattered. And yet, as evening fell and the light dimmed, he couldn't shake the thought that somewhere on this street, someone still thought he didn't belong. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and glanced again at the badge lying next to his mug. He'd learned long ago that some lessons in life repeat until you face them directly, and this one, he realized, wasn't over yet. The following week, the neighborhood settled into its usual rhythm. The mail arrived on time, children played on the sidewalks, and lawnmowers hummed on Saturday mornings. For most people on Maple Crest Drive, life went on unchanged. For Marcus Reed, it was different. He kept his mornings structured: a jog before sunrise, coffee on the porch, a few hours of remote bureau work reviewing case briefs. He was careful, polite, and visible. He waved at his neighbors, introduced himself to those who would listen, and gave space to those who wouldn't. By Friday, he almost believed things had smoothed over. That evening, after a long video call with his field division, he stepped outside to trim a few low branches in his front yard. The sun was setting again, the lights soft and orange. He hummed to himself as he worked, the steady rhythm of the clippers cutting through the quiet. Halfway through, he noticed two kids from down the block watching from their bikes. "Evening," he called with a smile. "How's school treating you?" They laughed, shrugged, and rode off. Marcus smiled and went back to work. Then a car slowed as it passed. Not a patrol car, just a silver sedan. The driver, a woman in her 40s, looked at him for a few seconds longer than comfort allowed. Marcus nodded politely, but she didn't wave back. She pulled into a nearby driveway and went inside. He thought little of it. He'd grown used to looks that lasted a beat too long. 30 minutes later, as he was putting away the tools, he heard tires crunching on the street again. This time the sound came from behind him. He turned and saw flashing blue lights. Two police cruisers rolled to a stop in front of his house. Marcus exhaled quietly, jaw tightening. "Again," he muttered. Both officers stepped out. Different faces this time, younger, more rigid. "Sir," one called, hand resting on his holster. "We got a report of a suspicious person in the yard." Marcus set the trimmers down slowly. "That would be me. I live here." The second officer squinted toward the house. "This your property?" "Yes," Marcus said calmly. "Marcus Reed. Bought it last month. 5 paperwork's inside." The first officer glanced at his partner, then back at Marcus. "You have ID on you?" "In my wallet inside the house. Mind if we verify that?" Marcus took a slow breath. "I do, actually. I'm not inviting anyone into my home without reason." "Sir, we just need to confirm—" "You can confirm it right here," Marcus said, steady but firm. "Wait by the porch. I'll grab my ID." He walked toward the door, feeling both pairs of eyes on his back. Every instinct from years of training told him to stay calm, move slowly, keep control. But beneath the calm was something heavier, the sting of disbelief that this was happening again. When he returned with his wallet, the first officer was speaking into his radio, his tone clipped. Marcus handed over his license. "That's me. Address matches." The younger officer looked at the ID, then at Marcus. "You said you live here alone?" "For now. My sister visits sometimes." "Mind telling us what you're doing outside this evening?" Marcus almost laughed. "Trimming branches. You're welcome to check the clippers if you think I'm hiding a tree permit." The officer's jaw tensed. "No need to be smart, sir." "I wasn't," Marcus said quietly. "I was being polite." For a long moment, no one spoke. The situation balanced on a wire, not hostile but tight. Then, from across the street, the same woman who had driven by earlier stepped onto her porch. "Officers!" she called. "That's the man I told you about. He's been out here every night." Marcus turned toward her, stunned. "Every night?" "I've been here a week." The older officer looked back at him. "Sir, please step over to the curb for a moment." Marcus frowned. "Excuse me?" "Just procedure, until we get this sorted." He hesitated, then set his wallet on the hood of his car and stepped toward the curb. His heart beat faster, not from fear but from the absurdity of it. He'd spent most of his career walking into dangerous rooms with confidence, but this was different. This was standing unarmed in his own front yard, seen as something he wasn't. As the younger officer began another radio call, Marcus reached into his jacket slowly. "Before this goes any further," he said, "I want to show you something." The first officer's hand went instinctively toward his belt. "Sir, I need you to stop right there." Marcus froze. "Relax," he said calmly. "I'm not reaching for anything dangerous." He moved with deliberate care, pulling a small leather case from his inside pocket. He opened it, holding it up so both could see the gold badge gleaming in the fading light. "Special Agent Marcus Reed, FBI," he said evenly. "Field Operations Division, Washington, D.C." The silence that followed was instant and deep. The older officer blinked, his face draining of color. You're FBI?" "Yes," Marcus said. "And if you radio that number you just called, someone from your precinct will confirm it in about 30 seconds. The younger officer swallowed hard, already speaking softly into his shoulder mic. His tone changed completely. "Dispatch, can you verify Special Agent Marcus Reed, badge number 7426? Static, then a pause, confirmed, the voice replied. "That's verified. He's active." The officers exchanged a look that was part confusion, part embarrassment. Marcus slipped the badge back into his pocket. "Now," he said quietly, "would you like to explain why I'm being questioned twice in 1 week on my own property?" The older officer rubbed the back of his neck. "Sir, we were just responding to a call." "We didn't—" "I know," Marcus said, his voice calm but cold. "You're doing your job. But you might want to ask yourself why that same call keeps coming from the same street." The younger one stepped forward awkwardly. Sorry, Agent Reed." Marcus studied their faces. They looked uncomfortable, but not cruel. He could tell they weren't bad men, just untrained in seeing beyond assumptions. "Apology accepted," he said finally. "Do me a favor. Let your watch captain know I'd like a word next week." Not a complaint and a conversation. They nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." As they drove off, Marcus stood there, the red and blue lights fading into the distance. He looked across the street. The woman was gone from her porch. Inside, he set the badge down on the kitchen counter, next to his coffee mug. The quiet returned, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. He leaned against the counter, exhaling. The anger had passed. What remained was something else, a tired kind of sadness. He had spent his life defending fairness, enforcing law, and training others to see clearly. Yet even here, in his own home, he realized how deep habits of suspicion could run. He picked up the badge, turning it over in his hand. "Still just a man in someone else's story," he murmured. Then he straightened, walked to the desk in his office, and opened a fresh file. He wrote one word on the top: training. He didn't know it yet, but that file, and the project it would spark, would soon reach far beyond Maple Crest Drive. The following Monday, Marcus Reed walked into the local police precinct with a quiet purpose. He had called ahead, not to file a complaint but to request a meeting. The watch captain had sounded surprised at first, maybe even nervous, but he agreed. Marcus knew that tone well. It was the sound of someone bracing for confrontation. The front desk officer looked up as Marcus entered. "Morning. Can I help you?" "Yes, Special Agent Marcus Reed, FBI. I have a meeting scheduled with Captain Ruiz." The officer straightened instantly. "Of course, Agent Reed, one moment." Within minutes, Captain Ruiz appeared. Mid-50s, stocky build, salt and pepper hair, and a careful professionalism in his walk. His handshake was firm, his eyes direct. "Agent Reed," he said, "appreciate you coming in. I understand you've had some encounters with our patrol officers recently." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's one way to put it." Ruiz gestured toward his office. "Let's talk inside." The captain's office was modest. Stacks of files, a coffee mug with Best Dad printed on the side, and a wall covered in photos from charity events and commendations. He motioned for Marcus to sit. "Look," Ruiz began, leaning forward, "I reviewed both incident reports. The officers didn't realize who you were, but it seems they handled it professionally. No escalation, no disrespect." "I agree," Marcus said. "They stayed controlled. But the question isn't about professionalism. It's about perception." Ruiz frowned. "Perception?" "Yes. Twice in 1 week, 2 different sets of officers were called to my home for doing nothing more than existing there. Both times they arrived ready to assume the worst." Ruiz exhaled slowly. You think it's race. I know it's race, Marcus said quietly. And I know it's not just your precinct. It's something we both see from different sides of the same badge. The captain leaned back, silent for a moment. You're not wrong, he said finally. But changing how people see, that's hard. Marcus nodded. It's not impossible, Ruiz studied him. What are you proposing? Marcus slid the file folder across the desk, the one he had started that night after the second encounter. Inside were typed notes, outlines, and hand-scribbled ideas. Training, Marcus said simply. Not the mandatory bias seminar you check off once a year. Something real. Something built around field experiences. A joint program between the Bureau and local law enforcement. I'll volunteer to lead it. Ruiz opened the folder, scanning the first few pages. Community-based situational awareness and perception response. He raised an eyebrow. That's a mouthful, Marcus smiled. You can rename it. The idea is to show officers how easily perception skews judgment, how subconscious fear turns into assumption. I've trained agents on field control under pressure. The same techniques can help officers recognize bias before it takes over. Ruiz tapped the file lightly. And you do this for free? Marcus shrugged. I do it because I live in that neighborhood. Because one day the next man who looks like me might not have a badge to end the conversation. The captain nodded slowly. You're right about that. He leaned back, thoughtful. All right, Agent Reed. Let's start with my precinct. I'll make some calls. You'll have my full support. Marcus stood, shaking his hand. Thank you, Captain. As he turned to leave, Ruiz added, For what it's worth, I'm glad you moved here. We could use more men like you reminding us of the things we forget to see. Marcus smiled faintly. We all need reminders, Captain. 2 weeks later, the first session took place in the precinct's training hall. About 20 officers filled the room. Some skeptical, some curious, a few defensive before he even started. Marcus stood at the front in plain clothes, no suit, no badge visible. He began simply. When you walk into a call, what's the first thing you see? A hand went up. The person, an officer said. Good, Marcus replied. Now what's the first thing you assume? There was a pause. Sam shifted uncomfortably. He didn't lecture. He told stories, not of heroics, but of misunderstanding. A case where an undercover agent had been mistaken for a suspect by another team. A surveillance gone wrong because a neighbor made a false assumption. Each story came back to the same truth. Control starts with awareness. By the end of the session, the room was quieter. He could see it in their faces, the slow recognition that bias wasn't about being bad people. It was about being human. When it ended, a young officer approached him. Agent Reed, he said quietly. I was one of the officers who came to your house that first night. Marcus turned. The man looked nervous. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, the officer continued. Not because you were FBI, because you shouldn't have needed to be. Marcus nodded, his expression calm but kind. Apology accepted. Now take what you learned today and pass it on. That's how this changes. The officer smiled faintly. Yes, sir. Over the next few months, the program grew. Other precincts joined. The Bureau took notice. Soon Marcus was traveling across the state, teaching classes on perception response training. It became a bridge between law enforcement and the communities they served, built not on policy, but on presence. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. His neighbors slowly warmed. Some stopped to talk during his morning jogs. Others waved from their porches. The woman who had called the police eventually came by with an awkward plate of cookies and an apology. Marcus accepted it with a smile. We all misread things sometimes, he said gently. What matters is what we learn after. She nodded, embarrassed but grateful. That evening he sat on his porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset bleed orange across the street. For the first time since moving in, the quiet felt like peace, not isolation. He reached into his pocket and touched his badge, feeling its familiar weight. For years it had meant authority. Now it meant something more. Responsibility. He knew there would always be others like him in other neighborhoods facing the same questions. But maybe, little by little, one conversation at a time, things could shift. The streetlights flickered on. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The world wasn't fixed, but it was listening, and for now that was enough. 5 years passed quietly in Maple Crest. The neighborhood had changed in small but meaningful ways. The lawns were still trimmed, the mail still came on time, but the people had changed. They talked more, asked more questions, waved at one another. Marcus Reed's house no longer drew cautious glances. It had become a familiar landmark, the home of the man who helped turn a moment of misunderstanding into a lesson the whole community learned from. He'd never planned to stay this long. His bureau career had offered transfers, promotions, even a post overseas, but he always said no. The work here, the quiet, unseen work, had turned into something deeper. By now, his perception response training program had spread far beyond his state. Police academies across the country had adopted it as part of their community integrity curriculum. He traveled occasionally to speak, but he preferred teaching small groups. He said that real change never happened in conference rooms. It started in eye contact, one person at a time. One autumn morning, he received an invitation in the mail. It was from the local precinct, the same one where it had all started. The letter asked him to attend a special ceremony, recognizing him for exemplary public service and leadership in community reform. He smiled softly as he read it. He'd never cared much for recognition, but this one felt different. That evening, he found himself back in that same building, walking the same hallway. The walls now displayed posters from his own training program. See the person before the situation. Assume understanding, not guilt. Lead with calm. When he entered the assembly room, he was greeted with a round of applause. Officers, trainees, and community members filled the seats. Among them, Captain Ruiz, now retired but still involved in mentoring young officers, waved him over. "Agent Reed," Ruiz said warmly. "I told them you'd show up." Marcus shook his hand. "Wouldn't miss it," Ruiz smiled. "You changed this place. Don't let anyone tell you different." The new police chief took the stage, a young woman in her early 30s with a calm authority about her. "5 years ago," she began, "an incident took place in our town that could have divided us. Instead, one man turned it into a bridge." She turned toward Marcus. "He taught us that leadership isn't about power. It's about restraint, humility, and awareness. Today, our department is safer, not because of new rules, but because of new understanding." Applause rose again. Marcus stood, slightly embarrassed but smiling. When the ceremony ended, people came forward to shake his hand. Officers who had taken his course, residents who remembered the stories, young recruits who had grown up hearing about the trespassing case that changed everything. One of them, a nervous cadet, handed him a small photo. It showed a group of officers standing in a community center, laughing with a group of neighborhood kids. "This was from last week," the cadet said. "We started an outreach day after your model. We call it Unity Patrol. It's working." Marcus studied the photo for a long moment. "That's beautiful," he said. When he stepped outside later, the air was cool and crisp. The town glowed under streetlights. As he walked to his car, he passed a patrol cruiser parked nearby. The young officer behind the wheel rolled down the window. "Evening, sir," she said with a smile. "Quiet night." Marcus returned the smile. "That's the best kind," she hesitated. "I took your training last year. It made me rethink a lot." "Good," he said gently. "That means it's working." He got in his car and drove home, the headlights tracing familiar turns. When he reached Maple Crest Drive, he slowed as he passed the same house across the street. The one where the call had come from all those years ago. The woman still lived there. She was older now, slower to move, but when she saw his car, she waved. He waved back. Inside his home, everything was quiet. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a wall clock. He walked to the study where his badge rested on the shelf beside framed photographs from his training events. He ran a thumb over the metal surface, the way he used to after long days in the field. It had once been a symbol of authority. Now it felt like a reminder of something much simpler. Responsibility, earned and renewed every day. He sat down by the window, watching the street outside. Children laughed somewhere down the block. A dog barked. The world carried on, ordinary and peaceful. Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes. He thought of all the places his career had taken him, foreign cities, tense operations, moments when control was the difference between chaos and calm. None of it compared to what had started on that quiet street 5 years ago. He didn't need applause or headlines. Change, he'd learned, rarely made noise. It lived in the small moments. An officer hesitating before judging, a neighbor waving instead of assuming, a conversation that replaced fear with understanding. He looked at the badge one last time and smiled. "That's all the power I ever needed," he said quietly. Outside, a patrol car rolled slowly past, its lights off, just keeping watch. The young officer at the wheel saw him sitting there and gave a small salute. Marcus lifted his hand in return. The town was still. The night was calm, and for the first time in a long time, the man once accused of trespassing felt completely, finally, home.